Abandoned by their children, they dig the earth and reveal a house hidden underground. Arthur and Martha never imagined that at 72 years old, they would be completely alone, abandoned by the very children they had raised with so much love and sacrifice. The decision of their 3 children had been made at a family meeting from which they were excluded. Their parents should be placed in a nursing home for the elderly in Atlanta. The justification was always the same in the whispered conversations among the children. Their father could no longer work properly on the small rural property in Oak Creek, and their mother was becoming too forgetful to take care of the house. But Arthur knew the truth behind that cruel decision. The children wanted to sell the land where the family had lived for 3 generations to a mining company that was offering a tempting sum. "Dad, they can say whatever they want, but as long as I have strength in these arms, I'm not leaving this land," said Martha, gripping the hoe firmly as she surveyed the grounds around the simple house where they had raised their children. Arthur adjusted his worn-out cap and picked up the old shovel he had been using for decades. His grey hair was damp with sweat, but the determination in his brown eyes hadn't diminished one bit since he'd turned 70 the previous month. "You're right, Martha. This land saw our parents born, our children, our grandchildren. If they want to prove we're incapable, we'll show them what we're still capable of." The couple had decided to do something they hadn't attempted in years, completely renovate the property with their own hands. They wanted to prove to their children, and above all to themselves, that they still had vigor and purpose. Martha, even at 68 years old with her hair completely white, kept the upright posture of someone who had been a rural school teacher for 40 years. The first task was to clear the backyard, which had become a dumping ground for rubble and overgrown weeds over the past few years. Arthur put on his favorite red jacket, the one Martha had given him as an anniversary gift last year, while she put on the blue coat she always wore to work in the garden. "Look here, Art." Martha pointed to an uneven area in the ground where the soil seemed to have sunk slightly. "I never noticed this before. It looks like something was buried here a long time ago." Arthur approached and examined the spot with the experienced eye of someone who had worked the land his entire life. The depression in the ground formed an almost perfect rectangle, as if a structure had been covered, and over time the earth had settled slightly. "You know what, woman? My father always used to say this property held secrets. Maybe it's time we found out what he meant by that." Martha picked up her favorite hoe, the one with the wooden handle that Arthur had made especially for her smaller hands, and began breaking through the dry soil. The work was heavy for someone her age, but there was a renewed energy in her movements. For the first time in months, she felt she had a real purpose. Arthur began digging with the shovel, removing layers of earth that seemed not to have been touched in decades. With every shovelful of dirt he removed, he became more convinced that there was something important buried in that spot. The soil had a different color, darker, as if it had been disturbed and compacted artificially. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us folks who are just starting out. Now, continuing, "Martha, come see this," Arthur called to his wife, who was moving aside the rubble already cleared. "This soil isn't natural. Someone dug here before, a long time ago." Martha approached and observed the difference in the color and texture of the ground. Her blue eyes, still lively despite her age, sparkled with curiosity. It was the same spark her students saw when she explained something interesting at the rural school where she taught for 4 decades. "Remember when we were young and you always said you wanted to be an archaeologist?" Martha smiled, picking up the hoe again. "Maybe this is our chance to make a discovery." The work continued throughout the morning. The October sun in Georgia was strong, but the breeze coming from the mountains made the work bearable. Arthur took off his red jacket and kept digging in just his shirt, while Martha kept her blue coat on to protect herself from the wind. As they dug, they realized the buried area was larger than they had initially imagined. What seemed to be a small hole turned out to be a rectangular depression of approximately 3 by 4 meters. Arthur, who had worked as a carpenter before dedicating himself fully to farming, immediately recognized the shape. "Martha, this is too big to be a simple hole. It looks like a buried structure." The discovery excited them even more. They completely forgot about fatigue and age, working with the energy of people decades younger. Martha prepared a quick snack and brought cold water from the spring in the backyard, and they took a break in the shade of the old mango tree Arthur had planted when they got married. "You know what I was thinking, Art," Martha said, taking a bite of the grilled cheese she had made herself. "Maybe our children are wrong about us. Look at the energy we still have when we do something that has meaning." Arthur nodded in agreement, looking at the work they had done that morning. The hole was already almost a meter deep, and they had barely felt the physical effort. It was as if the discovery had awakened a strength that had been dormant inside them. The boys have always seen us as tired old folks who are nothing but a burden, but they forgot that it was with these hands that we built everything they have today. After lunch, they resumed the work with even more determination. Arthur had brought some better tools from the shed, including a crowbar that could come in handy if they found something solid buried. Martha organized the work area better, separating the removed dirt and keeping the site clean to make the excavation easier. Around 3 in the afternoon, Arthur's shovel hit something solid. The sound wasn't stone, but wood. They looked at each other expectantly, and Arthur struck again with the shovel in different spots. The hollow sound confirmed their suspicions. There was a wooden structure buried there. "Martha, I think we found something important. Let's be careful not to damage it." They changed their technique, using their hands and smaller tools to remove the dirt more delicately. Soon they could clearly see pieces of dark wood, well preserved despite the years buried. Arthur immediately recognized the type of wood and the construction technique. "This is peroba wood, and look at these joints here, Martha. This structure was built by someone who really knew carpentry. It must be over 50 years old, maybe even more." The discovery of well-preserved wooden boards filled them with excitement. Arthur, with his experience as a carpenter, explained to Martha that the wood had been treated and prepared specifically to resist the moisture in the soil. Someone had built that structure with the intention of making it last a long time. Martha began to imagine the possibilities of what that structure could be. Was it an old wine cellar, a forgotten basement, maybe a hiding place built during hard times? Her curious former teacher mind was coming up with theories as she kept helping with the excavation. "Art, do you remember if your parents ever mentioned anything about something buried here?" Arthur stopped to think, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His memory went back decades, to conversations with his father that didn't seem important at the time, but now took on a new meaning. "You know, my father always said this land had stories to tell, and once he mentioned something about the hard times, when people had to hide what was important. I was too young to really understand." As they removed more dirt, the buried structure revealed itself to be larger and more elaborate than they had expected. It wasn't just a hole lined with wood, but a well-planned construction, with beams and frameworks that indicated a specific purpose. Arthur estimated it would take at least 2 more days of work to fully expose the structure. The end of the afternoon brought a sense of accomplishment they hadn't felt in a long time. They were dirty, tired, but deeply satisfied with the progress of their work. Martha drew a warm bath for the 2 of them, and Arthur organized the tools for the next day. During the simple dinner of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes that Martha had prepared on the wood stove, they talked excitedly about the discovery. It was the first time in months they had something that truly excited them, something beyond their worries about their health, their ungrateful children, or the uncertain future. "You know what makes me happiest about all this, Martha?" Arthur said, serving himself some more potatoes. "It's that we're doing it together. It's been a long time since we worked side by side like this." Martha smiled, remembering the early years of their marriage when they worked together on the farm and raising the children. The discovery had brought back a partnership that had been lost to time and the responsibilities of adult life. "Tomorrow I'm going to make a cornbread for us to eat during the break, and maybe we should buy some better tools in town. If we're going to do this job, let's do it right." The next morning they woke up early, eager to continue the excavation. Arthur checked the weather forecast on the old kitchen radio and was pleased to learn there was no rain in sight for the coming days. Martha made a strong pot of coffee and set out more suitable work clothes for the day. Before they started digging, Arthur did a careful inspection of the previous day's work. During the night, he had worried about the possibility of the structure being unstable, but everything seemed solid and safe. The wood, though old, was in surprisingly good condition. "Martha, come see this. These beams here are perfect. Whoever built this really knew their craft. The construction technique impressed Arthur, who had worked with wood his entire life. The joints were precise, the measurements exact, and there were signs that quality tools had been used. This wasn't the work of an amateur, but of an experienced craftsman. The second day of work was more technical and careful. Instead of simply removing dirt, they had to delicately clean the wood and check the integrity of the structure. Arthur used old brushes to remove the accumulated dirt from the details of the construction, gradually revealing the true extent of the work. Around noon, after 4 straight hours of work, they made a discovery that left them even more intrigued. On one of the side beams, Arthur found numbers carved into the wood. 1952. The date was clear and well preserved, confirming that the structure was over 70 years old. 1952, Martha repeated the date thoughtfully. I was only 2 years old. You were 7. Our parents were pretty young back then. The date made them reflect on the historical context of the construction. 1952 was a year of political change in the country, a period of economic and social uncertainty. Perhaps the buried structure had been built as a precaution against hard times that might come. Arthur recalled stories he heard as a child about people who hid valuables and important documents during periods of instability. His own grandfather had once mentioned the need to prepare for hard times, but he had never given much importance to those conversations. In the middle of the afternoon, they finally managed to fully expose what appeared to be a door or entrance to the underground structure. It was an impressive construction, a small house or underground chamber, approximately 3 meters wide by 4 meters long, with enough height for a person to stand. Art. This isn't just a hiding place, Martha observed, admiring the quality of the construction. This is a real underground house. Someone planned this to be used for a long period. The discovery of a door completely changed their perspective on the excavation. It wasn't just a buried structure, but a space that had been built to be inhabited. Arthur examined the door and realized it was only fitted in place, not locked. Carefully, he managed to move it slightly. Martha, I think we can open this, but maybe we should wait until tomorrow, when we have better light and more time. The anxiety to see the inside of the structure was great, but Arthur was right about waiting. They didn't know what they would find in there, and it was better to be prepared with flashlights and proper tools. Besides, the day's work had been intense and they needed rest. That night, during dinner, they could barely talk about anything else. The discovery had sparked a curiosity they hadn't felt in decades. Martha even dreamed about the underground structure, imagining what secrets it might hold. You know what I keep thinking about, Art, Martha said, pouring the coffee after dinner. If our children knew about this discovery, would they change their minds about us? Arthur reflected on his wife's question. The children had completely lost faith in their parents' abilities, treating them as incapable and outdated people. Maybe the discovery could show that they still had much to contribute, that they were still interesting people capable of significant achievements. I don't know, Martha, but what I do know is that this discovery is doing us both good. I haven't felt this alive and useful in a long time. On the third morning, they woke up even earlier, barely able to contain their anxiety. Arthur set aside 2 powerful flashlights and some candles, along with basic tools in case they needed to make any adjustments at the entrance. Martha prepared a more substantial snack, anticipating they might spend the entire day exploring the discovery. The door to the underground structure opened with a dull creak, but without much difficulty. Arthur entered first with the flashlight, followed by Martha. What they saw left them completely speechless. It wasn't just an empty chamber, but a carefully organized and furnished space. There was a small table, 2 chairs, some shelves on the walls, and several objects neatly arranged. The air was stuffy, but there was no smell of mold or decay. The structure had been sealed so well that the interior remained surprisingly well preserved. My God, Art, Martha whispered, illuminating the objects scattered around the room with her flashlight. Someone lived here. This was built to be inhabited. Arthur examined the walls and ceiling, impressed by the quality of the construction. There were even small ventilation openings, disguised on the outside but functional. Whoever built that place knew very well the techniques needed to create a habitable underground environment. On the table, they found some objects that indicated the recent use of the space: a metal mug, some simple plates, and a locked wooden box. On the shelves, there were books, some documents yellowed by time, and photographs in simple picture frames. Martha picked up one of the photographs and took it to the entrance to examine it more closely in the natural light. What she saw made her stagger. The photo showed a young couple in front of the house where they currently lived, but the image was clearly from decades earlier. "Art, come see this. I think I recognize these people." Arthur approached and examined the photograph. The man in the image had features that seemed familiar to him, and the woman looked remarkably like Martha's mother when she was young. "Martha, this woman isn't—" "She's my mother," Martha finished the sentence, her voice choked with emotion. "That's my mother when she was young. I'd recognize this face anywhere." The discovery that the underground structure had a direct connection with Martha's family completely changed the meaning of the excavation. It wasn't just an ancient, mysterious structure, but part of their personal history. Martha held the photograph with trembling hands, trying to process the information. Arthur picked up other photographs from the shelves and examined them carefully. There were several images of the same couple, always on the property where they currently lived. In some photos, other people appeared, probably family and friends from that time. "Did your mother ever mention that she worked here?" Arthur asked, trying to understand the connection. Martha tried to remember old conversations with her mother, who had passed away 15 years earlier. Her mother had always been reserved about the past, especially about the years before her marriage. Now, seeing those photographs, Martha realized there were important gaps in the family history that she had never questioned. She always said she had worked on several farms when she was young before meeting my father, but she never gave details. She said those were hard times, and she preferred not to remember. They continued exploring the underground space, finding more evidence that it had been inhabited for a considerable period. There were clothes carefully folded in a box, basic kitchen utensils, and even some books that seemed to have been read frequently. Arthur found an old tin that contained some documents. Carefully, he removed the yellowed papers and examined them by flashlight. They were mainly receipts and correspondence, but there was also something that appeared to be a contract or legal agreement. "Martha, I think I found something important here." The document Arthur had found was a property deed dated 1951. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but still legible. The most surprising thing was that the document indicated that part of the property where they lived legally belonged to a family whose name was unfamiliar to both of them. "This here says that 5 hectares of this property belong to a family named Vance, but I've never heard of any Vance as the owner of this land." Martha took the document and examined it carefully. Her experience as a teacher had taught her to read old documents and understand basic legal language. What she read surprised her even more. "Art, this document was never cancelled. According to what is written here, this family still has legal rights over part of our property." The discovery of the document raised important questions about the legality of the property and their children's plans to sell it. If there were unresolved property disputes, the sale to Earthworks Mining Corp would become much more complicated, possibly impossible until the situation was clarified. Arthur carefully stored the document in the metal box he had brought to protect the important findings. They decided to continue exploring the underground space before worrying about the legal implications of the discovery. In a small alcove at the back of the structure, Martha found something that deeply moved her, a small chest containing handwritten letters. The letters were tied with a faded ribbon and seemed to have been preserved with great care. "They're love letters," Martha whispered, reading the first lines of one of the letters. "Written by someone named Joseph for a woman named Eleanor." Arthur approached and Martha read some excerpts from the letters aloud. They were passionate correspondence between a young couple who seemed to face difficulties being together. The letters mentioned the need to hide to find a safe place to be together. "Listen to this, Art. My dear Eleanor, I built our special refuge where we can be safe until we can officially marry. No one will find us there, and we can be happy away from the eyes of those who judge us." Reading the letters revealed a love story that had unfolded decades ago on the same property where they lived. Joseph and Eleanor had built the underground hideout as a place where they could meet and eventually live together, apparently fleeing some kind of opposition to their relationship. Martha continued reading the letters, discovering more details about the couple's story. Joseph seemed to be a talented carpenter, which explained the quality of the underground construction. Eleanor worked as a housemaid on several farms in the region, including the property where Arthur and Martha currently lived. Art, I think I understand now. Eleanor must have been my mother. The dates match, and she always said she worked as a housemaid before getting married. She and Joseph must have hidden here when they were young. The revelation that the underground construction had been Martha's parents' love hideout gave a completely new meaning to the discovery. It wasn't just an interesting structure found by chance, but a place charged with personal and emotional history. Arthur was moved to realize they had discovered an important piece of Martha's family history. The fact that they had found the place exactly when they most needed hope and purpose seemed more than just a coincidence. "Do you know what this means, Martha?" Arthur said, holding his wife's hand. "You have deeper roots in this land than we imagined. This property has been part of your family's history for decades." The discovery also explained why Martha had always felt so connected to that land, even having grown up in the city. It was as if something inside her recognized the place as part of her personal history, an ancestral memory that now gained concrete meaning. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring every corner of the underground construction, finding more details about Joseph and Eleanor's lives. There were indications that they had lived there for several months, possibly waiting for an opportunity to officially marry. In one of the last letters, Joseph wrote about his plans to buy part of the property where he worked, so they could build their own home. He mentioned having saved enough money and being in negotiations with the farm owner. "My dear Eleanor, soon we will own a piece of this blessed land. I've already arranged with Mr. Sterling that 5 hectares will be ours, and we can leave our hideout to live in the sunlight." The letter explained the legal document they had found. Joseph really had bought part of the property in 1951, but for some reason had never officially taken possession of the land. The purchase document had been kept in the underground hideout, along with the letters and photographs. When they left the underground structure at the end of the afternoon, Arthur and Martha were deeply transformed by the discovery. They hadn't just found an interesting structure, but had reconnected with an important part of their family history that had been lost to time. "Art, I need to understand better what happened with my mother and this Joseph. Why did she never tell me this story?" Arthur suggested they look for someone in town who might have knowledge about the old families of the region. Maybe Mrs. Mabel, the 85-year-old lady who lived near the church, could remember something about Eleanor and Joseph. That night, Martha could barely sleep thinking about the discovery. Her mind crafted theories about what could have happened to Joseph and why her mother had kept that period of her life a secret. The letters indicated a great love, but something had prevented them from being together. The next morning, they decided to take a break from the excavation, to go to town and talk to Mrs. Mabel. The 15-kilometer trip to the center of Oak Creek was full of expectation and anxiety about what they might discover. Mrs. Mabel received them on the porch of her simple house, curious about what had brought them to her. When Martha mentioned the names Eleanor and Joseph, the lady's eyes lit up with immediate recognition. "Eleanor Miller. Of course I remember her. A very beautiful and hard-working young woman. And Joseph Vance, the carpenter. They were a scandal in town back in the 50s. The confirmation that Mrs. Mabel knew both characters from the letters filled Martha with anticipation. Finally, they could understand the complete story that had unfolded decades earlier on their own property. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. "A scandal?" Martha asked, trying not to show the anxiety she felt. Mrs. Mabel served coffee and homemade biscuits before continuing the story. Her eyes sparkled with the memory of events that had marked the small rural community decades ago. "Eleanor worked on Colonel Sterling's farm, the old owner of the property where you live today. Joseph was a carpenter and did work for several farms in the region. They fell in love, but there was a big problem. The lady made a dramatic pause, taking a sip of coffee before continuing. Martha was holding Arthur's hand, preparing to hear something that could change her understanding of her own mother. Eleanor was promised in marriage to another man. Her father had arranged the marriage with an older merchant from the neighboring town. But she wanted nothing to do with marrying someone she didn't love. The story was beginning to make sense. Eleanor and Joseph had built the underground hiding place as a refuge where they could be together while trying to resolve the arranged marriage situation. It was a time when women had little power to make decisions about their own lives. Joseph was a decent and hard-working young man, Mrs. Mabel continued. He tried to talk to Eleanor's father, even offered to pay the dowry that had been arranged with the other suitor, but old Mr. Miller wouldn't even hear of it. Arthur and Martha listened with growing attention as Mrs. Mabel reconstructed the events of more than 70 years ago. The story was taking on increasingly dramatic contours, explaining why Eleanor had kept that period of her life a secret. "So they ran away?" Martha asked, trying to fill in the gaps of the narrative. "They didn't exactly run away," Mrs. Mabel answered, shaking her head thoughtfully. "They hid for a while, waiting for an opportunity to resolve the situation. Joseph had managed to buy a piece of land from Colonel Sterling and planned to build a house for himself and Eleanor. The confirmation of the land purchase validated the document they had found in the underground structure. Joseph had indeed acquired legal rights over part of the property, but something had prevented him from taking effective possession of the land. "But what happened? Why didn't they stay together?" Martha insisted, feeling she was close to uncovering a fundamental truth about her own origins. Mrs. Mabel sighed deeply before continuing. It was evident that the story had an ending that wasn't entirely happy, and she hesitated to tell Martha all the details. "Joseph had an accident," she said finally. "He was working on building a roof when he fell and was seriously injured. He was unable to work for several months, and by the time he recovered, Eleanor had already left." "Left for where?" Arthur asked, noticing the lady's hesitation. "Eleanor found out she was expecting a baby. With family pressure and Joseph unable to work, she ended up agreeing to marry the merchant her father had chosen. She went to live in another city and never came back here." The revelation struck Martha like a lightning bolt. Her mother had been pregnant when she married the man she had always known as her grandfather. This meant there could be doubts about her own parentage, a possibility she had never considered. "Mrs. Mabel," Martha asked with a trembling voice, "do you know exactly when Eleanor got married?" She thought for a few moments, making mental calculations based on other events she remembered from that time. "It must have been in late 1952 or early 1953. I remember because it was right after Christmas. Eleanor was visibly pregnant at the ceremony, and it caused a lot of gossip in town." Martha did her own mental calculations. She had been born in May 1953. If her mother was already visibly pregnant in late 1952, the dates lined up perfectly with the possibility that Joseph was her biological father, not the merchant Eleanor had married. "And Joseph? What happened to him after Eleanor left?" "Poor Joseph," Mrs. Mabel said with sorrow. "He was completely devastated. He sold everything he had and left to work on the construction of Washington, D.C., which was just beginning to be built. We never heard from him again. I think he died far from here, never knowing whether Eleanor had had his child. The complete story was finally unfolding. Eleanor and Joseph had truly loved each other, built together the underground hiding place where they planned to live, but circumstances and social pressure had separated them. Eleanor had married another man to give an official father to the child she was expecting, and Joseph had left without knowing he would be a father. The emotional impact of the discovery was immense for Martha. Her entire life, she had wondered why she felt different from the other children in the family, why she had abilities and interests that no one else shared. Now she discovered she could be the daughter of a talented carpenter and a courageous mother who had fought for true love. Arthur held Martha's hand the entire way back home. He realized his wife needed time to process all the information they had uncovered. The search for answers about the underground structure had turned into a journey of profound personal discovery. Art. Now I understand why I've always felt so connected to this land. It's not just where we built our life together, it's where my mother lived her great love, where I was conceived. The discovery also completely changed the legal situation of the property. If Joseph had really bought 5 hectares of land and never taken possession, and if Martha was his daughter, she could have inheritance rights over that part of the property. This would significantly complicate the children's plans to sell everything to Earthworks Mining Corp. When they got home, they found an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. It was Charles, the oldest son, who had come alone for yet another attempt to convince his parents to agree to being placed in a nursing home. "Dad, Mum, we need to talk," Charles said as soon as he saw them arriving. "Earthworks Mining Corp's offer expires at the end of the month. You need to understand that you can't stay here alone anymore." Arthur and Martha exchanged glances. The morning's discovery had changed everything, but they weren't sure whether they should share the information with Charles right then. Their son seemed determined and impatient, showing no interest in hearing about archaeological discoveries or family stories. "Charles, come see what we found," Martha said, deciding to show her son the underground structure. Charles followed his parents to the backyard, obviously irritated by what he considered a waste of time. When he saw the excavated hole and the exposed structure, his expression changed from impatience to surprise. "What is this? You two were digging this giant hole by yourselves?" Arthur briefly explained how they had discovered the structure and the work they had done to fully expose it. Charles examined the structure with growing interest, impressed by the quality of the construction and its state of preservation. "This must have historical value," Charles said, his mind already calculating possibilities. "Maybe we can use this to increase the price of the property." Charles's reaction disappointed Martha. Even in the face of an extraordinary discovery that demonstrated his parents' capability, their son could only think about money. There was no acknowledgement of the physical effort they had put in, or curiosity about the history behind the structure. "Charles, this isn't about money," Martha said firmly. "It's about our history, about our capability, about the fact that we still have so much to contribute." Their son laughed with disdain, a sound that deeply hurt his parents' feelings. To him, the excavation was just an eccentricity of old people losing their minds, not a demonstration of vitality and purpose. "Mom, you dug a hole in the yard. That doesn't prove you can take care of an entire property. Actually, it proves the opposite. What responsible elderly people would do such heavy work all alone?" Arthur felt anger rising in his chest. His son not only devalued the work they had done, but also questioned their judgment in making the discovery. It was clear that Charles had made up his mind about his parents and wasn't willing to reconsider. "Son, you didn't even ask what we found in here," Arthur said, trying to stay calm. "You didn't even show curiosity about the history of this structure." Charles looked at his watch, showing that he considered the conversation a waste of time. His attitude made it clear that nothing his parents could say or show would change his opinion about the need for them to be placed in a nursing home. "Dad, I don't have time for archaeologist games. I have real responsibilities, a business to run, a family to provide for. You need to understand that this fantasy of independence isn't realistic at your age." The word fantasy hit Martha like a slap in the face. Her son was completely dismissing not only the physical discovery, but also his parents' feelings and emotional needs. To him, the desire for independence and dignity in old age was just a childish illusion. "Charles, your father and I did this by ourselves," Martha said, pointing at the excavation. "We worked 3 days straight, used heavy tools, solved technical problems. How can you say we're not capable?" "Because that's exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior that worries me," Charles replied, raising his voice. "You could have gotten hurt, you could have caused an accident, you could have damaged the property. 70-year-old men shouldn't be doing manual labor." The argument was escalating dangerously. Arthur realized Charles had come with a specific mission and wasn't willing to be swayed from it, no matter what his parents might show or argue. "Son, you're determined to put us in a nursing home, no matter what we do or say, aren't you?" Arthur asked directly. Charles hesitated for a moment, but then nodded in confirmation. His determination was based not on an actual assessment of his parents' capabilities, but on his own convenience and the financial gains the sale of the property would bring. It's the best decision for everyone. You'll have proper care and will be able to invest the money from the sale into an investment that secures the family's future. Charles's brutal honesty about his financial motivations sealed the rift between him and his parents once and for all. There was no longer any way to pretend the decision was made out of concern for the elderly's well-being. It was purely a matter of money. Martha felt tears of anger and disappointment welling up in her eyes. The son they had raised with so much love and sacrifice was treating them like obstacles to be removed, not like parents who deserved respect and consideration. "Charles, you can leave our property," Martha said with a firm voice. "And don't come back here until you're willing to treat us with the respect we deserve." The son was surprised by his mother's firmness. He was used to treating them like fragile, helpless people, but the Martha standing before him showed a strength he hadn't expected to find. "Mom, you're making a mistake. The mining company's offer won't last forever, and you don't have any other options." "We have more options than you think," Arthur said, thinking of the legal document they had found in the underground structure. "And maybe you can't sell this property as easily as you think." Charles left irritated and frustrated, unable to impose his will on his parents as he had expected. The visit had only strengthened Arthur and Martha's determination not to accept the forced institutionalization and to fight for their independence. That night they talked at length about the morning's discovery and Charles's unpleasant visit. The story of Eleanor and Joseph had taken on even greater meaning after the confrontation with their ungrateful son. "You know what impresses me most about your mother's story, Martha," Arthur said, holding his wife's hand. "She fought for true love, even when everyone was against her. We have to have the same courage." Martha agreed, feeling inspired by her mother's story of bravery. Eleanor had faced family and social pressure to stay with Joseph for as long as it was possible. Now it was Martha's turn to fight for her own dignity and independence. "Art, I think we should see a lawyer to examine that document. If I really do have inheritance rights to part of this property, our children can't force us out of here." The idea of seeking legal help gave a new dimension to the discovery of the underground structure. What had started as an excavation to prove their physical capability could become the key to securing their safety and independence. Arthur remembered Mr. Lawrence, a retired lawyer who lived in town and had been a family friend for decades. If anyone could help them understand the legal implications of the document they'd found, it was him. "Tomorrow we'll go into town to talk to Mr. Lawrence, and we'll also buy some better tools to keep working on the property. If the boys want to fight, we'll show them we're still fighters." The decision to seek legal help and keep investing in the property marked a turning point in the couple's attitude. Instead of passively accepting the fate their children wanted to impose on them, they chose to actively fight for their rights and dignity. The next morning they put on their best clothes and went into town with renewed determination. The visit to Mr. Lawrence would be the first step in a broader strategy of resistance against family pressures. Mr. Lawrence, a 78-year-old gentleman who had retired from law 5 years earlier, received them in his home office with genuine interest. When Arthur showed him the document found in the underground structure, the lawyer's eyes lit up. "This document is legitimate and still valid," Mr. Lawrence said after carefully examining the paper. "Joseph Vance officially purchased 12 acres of this property in 1951, and the purchase was never challenged or cancelled." The confirmation of the document's legal validity was like a ray of hope for Arthur and Martha. It meant there was indeed a property issue that would complicate any attempt to sell the land. "Mr. Lawrence, if Martha is Joseph's daughter, would she have inheritance rights to this land?" Arthur asked directly. Mr. Lawrence explained that Martha's paternity would need to be legally established for her to claim inheritance rights. That would require additional documentation and possibly testing, but it wasn't impossible. "The fact that you found this document and other evidence on the property helps a great deal. It shows that Joseph had a real physical presence on the land he purchased." The lawyer suggested they start by gathering all the evidence they had found in the underground structure: photographs, letters, documents, and any other objects that could establish the connection between Joseph, Eleanor, and Martha. "In the meantime, I'll search the city archives to see if I can find more information about Joseph Vance and the purchase he made. If we can establish a solid legal connection, you'll be in a very strong position to resist the pressure from your children." The meeting with Mr. Lawrence gave Arthur and Martha a sense of empowerment they hadn't felt in months. For the first time since their children had announced the plans to place them in a nursing home, they had a concrete strategy to defend themselves. "Do you know what this means, Martha?" Arthur said during lunch at a simple restaurant in town. "We're not just helpless old people our children can manipulate. We have rights, we have resources, we have history." Martha smiled, feeling stronger than she had in a long time. The discovery of the underground structure had triggered a series of revelations that were completely changing her perception of herself and her possibilities. "Art, I don't think this discovery was a coincidence. It was as if my mother were guiding us to find the truth about our family." After lunch, they went to the town's hardware store and bought better equipment to continue the work on the property. They didn't just want to defend their legal rights, they also wanted to physically demonstrate that they were still capable of taking care of the land. The store owner, who had known them for years, was surprised by the substantial purchase of quality tools. When he learned about the discovery of the underground structure, he showed great interest and offered technical help if they needed it. "Mr. Arthur, if you want to restore that structure properly, I know a retired bricklayer who'd love to be part of a project like this. John Henry always liked different kinds of work." The store owner's offer of help and the mention of other retirees interested in joining the project planted a seed in Martha's mind. Maybe they could turn the discovery into a community initiative that would benefit other seniors in the area. During the trip back home, they talked about the possibility of turning the restored underground structure into a meeting place for the community's elderly. It would be a way of showing that old age didn't mean isolation and uselessness. Imagine, Art, if we could create a space where the elderly in the region could gather, share stories, do crafts. It would be like honoring the memory of Joseph and Eleanor, who built that place with so much love. The idea excited Arthur, who had always been a sociable person but had become more isolated in recent years due to family pressures and his own age. The prospect of leading a community project awakened energies he thought he had lost. When they got home, they found another car parked in front of the house. It was Anne, the middle daughter, who had apparently come to support Charles's position about placing the parents in a nursing home. "Dad, Mom, Charles told me about yesterday's discussion," Anne said as soon as she saw them. "I think you're being too stubborn. We only want what's best for you." Arthur and Martha looked at each other, realizing that the children had coordinated a systematic pressure campaign. Anne seemed more diplomatic than Charles, but her message was basically the same. The parents should accept being placed in a nursing home without resistance. "Anne, did you see what we discovered?" Martha asked, trying to engage her daughter in a conversation about the underground structure. "I saw the hole you dug," Anne answered dismissively. "Frankly, Mom, that only confirms our concern. You could have gotten hurt doing that heavy work." Anne's reaction was as discouraging as Charles's. She was also focused only on the negative aspects of the discovery, interpreting everything as evidence of senile irresponsibility. "Daughter, you didn't even ask what we found in there," Arthur said, trying to spark some curiosity in his daughter. Anne sighed impatiently, making it clear that she considered any discovery irrelevant in light of what she saw as a risky situation for her elderly parents. "Dad, it doesn't matter what you found. What matters is that you're doing activities that are dangerous for your age. The nursing home has supervised, safe activities suitable for seniors." The word supervised deeply bothered Martha. Her daughter was talking as if they were children who needed constant supervision, not experienced adults capable of making their own decisions. "Anne, your father and I have lived together for 48 years, Martha said firmly. "We raised 3 children, built this property, faced hardships and celebrated victories. How can you think we need supervision to live our own lives?" The direct question embarrassed Anne, who was repeating prepared arguments without really considering her parents' feelings and dignity. She hesitated before answering, revealing that there were contradictions in her own thinking. "It's different now, Mom. You're older, more fragile. We worry about you." "If you truly worried about us," Arthur interrupted, "you'd be interested in knowing what we discovered. what we're doing, how we're feeling, but all I hear are decisions already made about our lives. Anne realized she was losing ground in the discussion. Her argument sounded hollow in the face of her parents' emotional logic, who clearly demonstrated that they still had the capacity for reasoning and decision-making. "You're being difficult," she said, resorting to guilt as a last strategy. "We have our own families to take care of. We can't always be worried about you here alone." The admission that the children saw their parents as an inconvenient burden was painful, but also enlightening. Arthur and Martha finally understood that the issue wasn't really about their well-being, but about their children's convenience. "Anne, we never asked you to worry about us," Martha said calmly. "We've always been independent, and we still are. The only thing we ask for is respect for our choices." The daughter left the house frustrated and irritated, unable to convince her parents to accept being placed in a care facility. Her visit, like Charles's the day before, only strengthened Arthur and Martha's determination to resist family pressures. That night, they carefully organized all the objects found in the underground structure, preparing for the legal research Mr. Lawrence would carry out. Each photograph, letter, and document could be crucial for establishing Martha's rights to the property. "You know what makes me saddest about all this, Art?" Martha said, examining the photographs of her young mother. "Our children are missing out on the chance to learn about an incredible family story because all they can think about is money." Arthur agreed, lamenting that their children had become so materialistic that they couldn't appreciate historical discoveries or emotional connections. Greed had blinded their ability to appreciate the extraordinary. "They've lost the ability to be moved by the important things in life," Arthur observed. "Maybe it's better this way. If they can't value us, they don't deserve to know our story either." The decision to no longer share discoveries with their children marked a fundamental shift in the family dynamic. Arthur and Martha were emotionally distancing themselves from their ungrateful children and preparing to build a new network of relationships based on mutual respect. The next morning they received an unexpected visit from John Henry, the retired mason mentioned by the merchant at the hardware store. He had become genuinely interested in the underground structure project and offered his help voluntarily. "Mr. Arthur, I heard about your discovery," John Henry said, tipping his hat respectfully. "If you don't mind, I'd really like to see that old structure. I love restoration work." John Henry's visit was like a breath of fresh air. Someone was finally showing genuine interest and enthusiasm for the discovery, offering help without ulterior motives. Arthur and Martha welcomed him joyfully and immediately took him to see the underground structure. "Good heavens!" John Henry exclaimed as he examined the structure. "What magnificent work! Whoever built this was a first-rate craftsman. Just look at these joints, this sealing technique. It's a masterpiece." John Henry's genuine enthusiasm contrasted sharply with the children's reaction. Here was someone who truly appreciated the quality of the work and the historical value of the discovery. Arthur showed John Henry the photographs and documents found inside the structure, explaining the story of Joseph and Eleanor that they had uncovered. The retired mason listened attentively with growing interest. "What a beautiful story," John Henry said, moved. "And what an extraordinary coincidence that you found exactly the place where Mrs. Martha's mother lived her great love story." John Henry offered not only his technical help to restore the structure, but also suggested they could create a small museum or heritage center on the site. His ideas were creative and respectful of the history they had discovered. "Just imagine, we can restore this space while keeping its authenticity, but adapting it to welcome visitors. It would be a way to honor the memory of Joseph and Eleanor, and also to highlight the historical richness of this region." John Henry's proposal excited Arthur and Martha. It was exactly the kind of project that could demonstrate their capability and vitality, while also creating something valuable for the community. "John Henry, do you really believe we can pull off this work at our age?" Martha asked, still influenced by her children's constant criticism. "Mrs. Martha, age doesn't matter when you have passion for a project," John Henry replied with conviction. "I'm 75 years old, and I've never felt so excited to work on something. This project can give us a new purpose in life." John Henry's answer was deeply inspiring. Here was a man only a few years younger than Arthur, showing energy, enthusiasm, and a vision for the future. He was living proof that age didn't have to mean decline and passivity. The three of them spent the rest of the morning planning the restoration project in detail. John Henry took precise measurements, assessed the structural conditions, and put together a realistic work schedule that would respect everyone's physical limitations. "We'll work 2 hours each morning with frequent breaks," John Henry proposed, "and always with at least 2 people present for safety. There's no rush. What matters is doing quality work." John Henry's careful professional approach put Martha at ease, since she'd been a bit worried about her children's criticism regarding safety. The project would be carried out responsibly, but without giving up enthusiasm and determination. During lunch, which Martha prepared for the three of them, John Henry shared stories about other restoration projects he had done. His experiences showed that it was possible to do meaningful work in one's later years, as long as there was proper planning. "The secret is knowing our limitations but not letting them limit us," John Henry explained. "We may not have the strength we had when we were young, but we have experience, patience, and wisdom that young people don't have." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now, continuing. John Henry's philosophy on life resonated deeply with Arthur and Martha. It was exactly the perspective they needed to counter their children's negative attitudes about aging and capability. That afternoon, they truly began the restoration work. John Henry brought some specialized tools and taught specific techniques for working with old wood without damaging it. The work was methodical, careful, and deeply satisfying. "See how this wood responded well to the cleaning." John Henry showed a section of the wall they had worked on. "It's practically as good as new after being buried for 70 years. Joseph really knew what he was doing. Working together quickly created a sense of camaraderie among the three of them. Arthur discovered he still remembered many carpentry techniques he hadn't used in decades, while Martha applied her attention to detail and organizational skills to the project. By the end of the first day of working together, they had made visible progress in cleaning and stabilizing the structure. The underground space was beginning to reveal its original beauty, validating the vision of turning it into something special. "You know what I discovered today," Arthur said during dinner, "that I still have a lot to learn and a lot to teach. This project is making me feel useful in a way I haven't felt in years." Martha agreed, realizing the project had awakened parts of her personality that had been dormant. Her experience as a teacher was being applied in a new way, organizing the work and documenting the restoration process. "I'm going to start keeping a project journal," Martha announced. "I want to record every discovery, every bit of progress, every person who helps us. This story deserves to be preserved." The idea of the project journal was excellent. Martha began that very night, writing about the initial discovery, the research on Eleanor and Joseph, and the beginning of the restoration. Her years as a teacher had prepared her to be an efficient chronicler. The next morning they received a visit that completely surprised them. It was Lucy, the youngest daughter, who had come alone and seemed nervous and uncomfortable. "Dad, Mum, I need to talk to you," Lucy said, avoiding eye contact. "It's about this nursing home situation." Arthur and Martha prepared themselves for yet another attempt at persuasion, but Lucy's demeanor seemed different from the earlier visits by Charles and Anne. She seemed genuinely conflicted, not determined. "Lucy, did you also come to pressure us into accepting institutionalization?" Martha asked directly. The direct question made Lucy even more uncomfortable. She shifted in her chair and took a while to answer, signs that there were internal conflicts she couldn't easily resolve. "Mum, I don't agree with everything Charles and Anne are doing," she finally admitted. "But they pressured me to support the family's decision." Lucy's admission was the first sign of a crack in the united front the children had presented. Arthur and Martha looked at each other, realizing that perhaps there was hope of maintaining at least one family relationship. "Why don't you agree, dear?" Arthur asked gently, trying to create a safe space for Lucy to express her true feelings. "Because you don't seem like incapable old people to me," Lucy replied, with tears in her eyes. "You're making incredible discoveries, working hard, taking care of yourselves. I don't understand why my siblings insist that you can't live on your own anymore." Lucy's emotional honesty contrasted drastically with the calculating coldness of the other two children. It was evident that she was genuinely torn between loyalty to the family and her own perceptions of her parents' capabilities. "Lucy, would you like to see the discovery we made?" Martha asked, offering an opportunity for her daughter to show genuine interest. "Yes, Mom, I would really like to see it." Lucy's enthusiastic response was comforting. Arthur and Martha took her to see the underground structure, explaining in detail the story of the discovery and the restoration plans. Lucy examined the structure with genuine interest, asked intelligent questions about the construction, and showed real emotion upon hearing the story of Eleanor and Joseph. Her reaction was completely different from that of her siblings. "This is extraordinary," Lucy said, carefully touching the old wood. "You've discovered a piece of our family's history, and you're restoring this place with your own hands. How can Charles and Anne not value something like this?" Lucy's question expressed exactly the frustration Arthur and Martha felt toward their other children. It was incomprehensible how people from the same family could have such different reactions to such a significant discovery. "Your siblings can only see the money that selling the property would bring," Arthur explained. "They've lost the ability to be moved by historical discoveries or personal achievements." Lucy spent the rest of the morning helping with the restoration work, showing physical willingness and enthusiasm that her siblings had not displayed. She worked side by side with Arthur, Martha, and John Henry, naturally integrating into the team. "Mom, can I come help you regularly?" Lucy asked during the snack break. "I'm going through a difficult time in my marriage, and this project is doing me a lot of good." The revelation that Lucy was facing marital problems partially explained why she was more receptive to her parents' emotional support. Unlike her siblings, who were in stable and prosperous situations, she needed genuine family connections. "Of course, dear," Martha replied, hugging Lucy affectionately. "This project is about family, about history, about people who help one another. You are very welcome." The inclusion of Lucy in the project completely changed the family dynamics. Arthur and Martha finally had a child who supported and valued them, someone who saw worth in their abilities and accomplishments. During lunch, Lucy confided more details about her personal situation. She was considering leaving her husband and needed to completely rethink her life at 42. "You know what's most impressive about all of this?" Lucy said, gesturing toward the underground structure. "It's that you two, at 70, are starting a new project, full of energy and purpose. Me at 40, I feel lost and without direction." Lucy's observation highlighted one of the most significant aspects of the discovery of the underground structure. The project had given Arthur and Martha back a sense of purpose and vitality that many younger people envied. "Honey, it's never too late to start over," Martha said wisely. "Your grandmother Eleanor started a new life at 20 when she got married. We're starting a new life at 70. You can do the same at 42. The conversation about starting over and second chances created a deep emotional connection between Lucy and her parents. She realized she could learn a lot from the courage and determination they were showing. That afternoon, Lucy helped Martha organize and catalog all the objects found in the underground structure. She brought a younger perspective and tech skills that complemented her parents' experience. "Mom, we should photograph everything digitally," Lucy suggested, "and maybe create an online archive about Eleanor and Joseph's story. Other people in the area might have memories or documents that could complete the story." The suggestion to create a digital archive was excellent. Lucy had computer skills that could significantly expand the reach and impact of the historical discovery. "And how about we create a website about the restoration project?" Lucy continued, getting excited about the possibilities. "We can document the whole process and maybe attract help from other people interested in historical preservation." Lucy's ideas brought a modern dimension to the project, connecting the history of the past with the possibilities of the present. Arthur and Martha were excited about the potential to expand the reach of their discovery. During dinner, Lucy asked a question that completely changed the perspective on the family conflict. "Dad, Mum, have you ever thought that maybe Charles and Anne are afraid?" "Afraid of what, dear?" "Afraid that you'll prove you're still capable and independent. Afraid of losing control over your decisions. Afraid that you don't need the protection they want to impose." Lucy's analysis of her siblings' motivations was deeply revealing. Maybe their resistance wasn't just greed, but also a matter of power and control over their elderly parents. "If you prove you can take care of yourselves and still carry out extraordinary projects," Lucy continued, "they lose the justification for making decisions for you, and that scares them, because they always saw themselves as the ones responsible for the family." Lucy's observation helped Arthur and Martha better understand the complex family dynamics that were unfolding. It wasn't just about money, but also about family roles and power hierarchies. "Maybe that's why they react so badly to our discoveries and accomplishments," Martha reflected. "Everything we do on our own challenges the narrative that we're helpless and need supervision." Understanding the psychological motivations of the other children didn't lessen the hurt, but it helped Arthur and Martha better contextualize the family conflict. They were fighting not just for physical independence, but also for emotional autonomy and personal dignity. Lucy offered to mediate a conversation between the parents and the siblings, trying to find a solution that respected the rights and feelings of everyone involved. She believed there was still a possibility of family reconciliation. "I don't know if your siblings are willing to listen," Arthur said skeptically. "They seem very determined to go through with the original plans." "But at least I can try," Lucy insisted. "And if I can't change their minds, at least they'll know that part of the family supports you completely." Lucy's willingness to confront her siblings in defense of her parents was comforting. Arthur and Martha finally had an ally in the family, someone willing to fight for their rights and dignity. That night, Lucy stayed over at her parents' house for the first time in years. It was a symbolic gesture of support and solidarity that meant a lot to Arthur and Martha. "You know what I realized today," Lucy said before going to bed. "That I wasted so much time worrying about small problems when I could have been learning from your wisdom and experience." Lucy's reflection on life priorities was touching. The discovery of the underground structure had created an opportunity to reconnect 3 generations of the family in a meaningful way. The next morning, Lucy actively participated in the restoration work from early on. She brought youthful energy to the project, but also learned traditional techniques from Arthur and John Henry. "It's amazing how relaxing working with your hands is," Lucy observed, carefully sanding an old piece of wood. "In my office job, I spend all day staring at a computer screen. This is completely different." Lucy's participation in the manual work created an experience of intergenerational connection that was rare in the family. Arthur was able to teach skills he had learned decades earlier, while Lucy contributed with energy and fresh perspectives. During the morning, they received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Mabel, the elderly woman who had told the story of Eleanor and Joseph. She had heard about the restoration project and was coming to offer more information about the historical couple. "I remembered a few more things about Eleanor and Joseph," Mrs. Mabel said, accepting the coffee Martha offered, "and I brought a photograph you might want to see." The photograph Mrs. Mabel brought showed a pregnant Eleanor next to Joseph, right in front of the very house where Arthur and Martha currently lived. It was a touching image that definitively confirmed the connection between Martha and her mother's love story. "This photo was taken shortly before Joseph had the accident," Mrs. Mabel explained. "Eleanor was radiant with happiness. They seemed so in love and hopeful about the future." Lucy was moved to see the historical photograph that documented her own family origins. It was like seeing the exact moment when her own existence was determined by historical circumstances. "Grandma Eleanor was truly very beautiful," Lucy observed, comparing the photograph with the others they had found, "and Joseph seemed like a very kind man." Mrs. Mabel also brought information about other community members who remembered Eleanor and Joseph. Apparently the couple's story had left a mark on several people in the region, and many still kept memories and objects related to them. "Jim from the workshop has some tools that belong to Joseph," Mrs. Mabel informed, "and Susan from the bakery has a letter that Eleanor wrote to her before leaving." The existence of more evidence and testimonies about Eleanor and Joseph significantly strengthened the legal case that Mr. Lawrence was building. Each new piece of evidence made Martha's claim over the hereditary rights to the property more solid. "Mrs. Mabel, would you like to participate in our restoration project?" Martha asked. It would be wonderful to have someone who knew Eleanor and Joseph personally, helping to preserve their memory. "Of course, my dear," Mrs. Mabel replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "It would be an honor to help preserve this beautiful story." The inclusion of Mrs. Mabel in the project brought an authentic historical dimension that significantly enriched the work. She had personal memories and details that weren't documented anywhere. "Did you know that Eleanor sang very well?" Mrs. Mabel shared. "She always hummed while she worked, and Joseph said he fell in love with her voice first, before he ever saw her face." Details like that humanized Eleanor and Joseph, turning them from abstract historical figures into real people with specific traits and personalities. Lucy suggested recording all these oral memories as part of the historical archive. During lunch, Mrs. Mabel told more stories about the rural community of the 1950s, painting a vivid portrait of the social and economic life of that time. Her narratives placed Eleanor and Joseph's story within a broader historical landscape. "Those were hard times," Mrs. Mabel explained. "Women had very little power to make choices about their own lives. Eleanor was brave to fight for true love, even knowing she could face serious consequences." The historical context helped Arthur, Martha, and Lucy better understand the pressures Eleanor had faced. Her decision to hide away with Joseph wasn't just romantic, it was also an act of resistance against the social conventions of her time. "It's interesting how generations repeat themselves," Lucy observed. "Grandma Eleanor fought for her independence and her right to choose. Now you're fighting for the same thing, just under different circumstances." Lucy's observation about the parallels between generations was insightful. Eleanor had resisted family pressure to accept an arranged marriage, just as Arthur and Martha were resisting family pressure to accept forced hospitalization. That afternoon, the expanded group worked together on the restoration with renewed energy. Mrs. Mabel, despite her advanced age, contributed with her presence and historical knowledge, while Lucy digitally documented the whole process. "We're creating something special here," John Henry observed, admiring the progress of the work. "This isn't just a restoration, it's a community of people who support one another." John Henry's observation captured perfectly what had developed around the underground construction project. It was more than a restoration effort. It was the forming of a new chosen family built on shared interests and mutual respect. At the end of the afternoon, Mr. Lawrence arrived with important news about his legal research. He had found additional documents in the city archives that significantly strengthened Martha's case. "I found the original record of Joseph's purchase," Mr. Lawrence announced, showing a photocopy of an official document. "And I also discovered that he paid all the property taxes for 2 consecutive years. The discovery that Joseph had fulfilled every legal obligation related to the property he bought dramatically strengthened Martha's legal position. It wasn't just a matter of forgotten paperwork, but of rights that had remained legally valid. Most importantly," Mr. Lawrence continued, "I found a birth certificate for Martha that lists father unknown. This will greatly facilitate establishing Joseph's paternity through circumstantial evidence." Mr. Lawrence's legal discoveries completely changed the balance of power in the family dispute. Arthur and Martha were no longer defenseless elderly people being pressured by greedy children, but people with solid legal rights and evidence to support them. "Mr. Lawrence, does this mean our children can't force us to sell the property?" Arthur asked. "It means they can't sell the property without first resolving the question of Martha's inheritance rights," Mr. Lawrence explained, "and that process could take months or even years to complete." The news that the property sale was effectively blocked was an immense relief for Arthur and Martha. They would have time to develop the underground structure project and definitively prove their capability and independence. "And there's one more thing," Mr. Lawrence said, smiling. "Earthworks Mining Corp., which wanted to buy the property, learned about the legal complications and withdrew its offer. They don't want to get involved in an inheritance dispute." The mining company's withdrawal of its purchase offer was a complete victory for Arthur and Martha. Not only had they preserved their home and independence, but they had also eliminated the financial motivation that drove their children's pressure. That night, there was an impromptu celebration at Arthur and Martha's home. The support group that had formed around the project, Lucy, John Henry, Mrs. Mabel and Mr. Lawrence, celebrated the legal and personal victories they had achieved. "Do you know what makes me proudest of all this?" Arthur said during the celebration. "It's not just that we won the legal dispute. It's that we proved that people our age can still make important discoveries, can still lead meaningful projects." Martha agreed, reflecting on how the discovery of the underground structure had completely transformed their lives in a matter of weeks. From elderly people who felt useless and abandoned, they had become leaders of an inspiring community project. What began as a desperate attempt to prove our capability became a journey of discovery about our own family history, Martha added. Eleanor and Joseph guided us to find not only their stories but our own strength. Lucy was deeply moved by the transformations she had witnessed. In just a few days, she had seen her parents go from seemingly defeated people to confident leaders of a movement of resistance and discovery. "Dad, Mom, you've inspired me more in these past few weeks than anything I've seen in recent years," Lucy said with tears in her eyes. "You showed me that it's never too late to fight for our rights and dreams." Lucy's transformation had also been remarkable. From an insecure woman dealing with marital problems, she had become a strong ally and an active participant in a project that gave her purpose and direction. "And now?" Mrs. Mabel asked. "What do you plan to do with all this victory?" The question about next steps was important. Arthur and Martha had won the immediate battle, but now they needed to decide how to use their new position of strength to build a meaningful future. "We're going to finish restoring the underground structure," Arthur said with determination, "and we're going to create the community center we've always dreamed of. It will be a place where people our age can gather, share stories, and prove that old age doesn't mean uselessness." Martha enthusiastically agreed with her husband's plans. The project had evolved far beyond a simple excavation. It had become a statement about the dignity, capability, and value of older people. "And we're going to document Eleanor and Joseph's entire story," Martha added. "Other families may have similar stories buried on their properties, literally or metaphorically." The idea of expanding the project to include other family stories from the region created exciting possibilities. The community center could become a repository of local memories and stories that would otherwise be lost. Mr. Lawrence suggested they make the project official by creating a small non-profit organization dedicated to historical preservation and community support for seniors. This would give the work a legal structure and funding opportunities. With the proper legal structure, you could apply for government grants for historical preservation, Mr. Lawrence explained. You could also accept donations from people interested in supporting the project. The prospect of professionalizing the project excited the entire group. What had started as a personal discovery could become a model for other rural communities interested in valuing their history and supporting their seniors. John Henry volunteered to coordinate the technical aspects of the construction and restoration, while Lucy would be responsible for digital documentation and online communication. Mrs. Mabel would serve as the project's official historical consultant. "And you two," Mr. Lawrence said, pointing to Arthur and Martha, "will be the project's directors and inspirations. You've proven that seniors can lead important initiatives and make significant discoveries." The assignment of official roles in the project gave everyone a sense of purpose and responsibility. They were no longer just an informal group of people working together, but a real organization with clear goals and a defined structure. The following week, news about the discovery of the underground structure and the restoration project began to spread throughout the region. A journalist from the local newspaper came to do a story on Eleanor and Joseph's history and the work being done. "This is exactly the kind of story our region needed," the journalist said, photographing the restored structure and interviewing project participants. "It shows that there are historical treasures hidden everywhere, waiting to be discovered." The newspaper article brought regional attention to the project. Arthur and Martha began receiving phone calls and visits from people interested in seeing the underground structure and learning about Eleanor and Joseph's story. "I never thought our discovery would interest so many people," Martha said to Arthur, watching another group of visitors approach the property. The public attention validated the importance of the discovery and the preservation project. It was no longer just a personal or family matter, but something of historical and cultural value for the entire region. Among the visitors was Professor Stephen James, a retired historian from the regional university who specialized in the rural history of Georgia. He was fascinated by the discovery and offered academic assistance to properly document the story. "This structure and the documents you found are a historical treasure," Professor Stephen James said after carefully examining everything. "They document an aspect of American rural life that is rarely preserved." The professor suggested they contact the State Historic Preservation Office to officially recognize the historical importance of the discovery. This could bring additional legal protection to the site and opportunities for government support for preservation. "You've made a discovery that goes beyond personal interest," the professor continued. "This has value for the entire academic community interested in the rural social history of the United States." The academic validation of the discovery's importance was deeply satisfying for Arthur and Martha. They had sensed that the underground structure was special, but now they had professional confirmation of its historical value. The academic interest also brought additional resources to the project. Professor Stephen James secured a small research grant from the university to support proper documentation of the discovery and the creation of a digital historical archive. "With university support, we can do this right," the professor explained. "Professional photographic documentation, proper archaeological analysis, broad historical research. You have discovered something that deserves the best academic treatment possible." The transformation of a personal excavation into an officially supported academic project was extraordinary. Arthur and Martha, who months earlier had been treated as incapable old people by their own children, were now being consulted by university professors and scholars. "You know what this proves, Martha," Arthur said during a break from the work. "It proves that experience and wisdom are just as valuable as youth and energy. Maybe more valuable, because they come with perspective and patience." The collaboration with the university also brought students interested in participating in the project as part of their studies in history and archaeology. Arthur and Martha's property became an active research site and an example of community historical preservation. "It's incredible how our lives have changed," Martha reflected, watching university students carefully working on the documentation of the underground structure. 3 months ago, we were considered a burden by our own children. Now we are collaborators in university research. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone involved in the project. Arthur and Martha had gone from seemingly obsolete people to central figures in a historical preservation project that was gaining regional recognition. During this period of the project's growth, Charles and Anne made a few attempts at reconciliation, clearly motivated by the public embarrassment of having tried to have their parents committed while they were carrying out important historical work. "Dad, Mum, maybe we were hasty in our concerns," Charles said during an awkward visit. "Seeing this whole project you've been developing, we realized that maybe we underestimated your abilities." Charles's attempt to downplay his earlier attempt to force his parents into a care facility was met with skepticism. Arthur and Martha were not willing to easily forget the lack of respect and support they had faced. "Charles, you had the opportunity to support this project from the beginning," Arthur said calmly. "You chose not to. You chose to see us as a problem to be solved, not as people with value and capability." Arthur's direct response left Charles uncomfortable. He expected his parents to be grateful for the reconciliation offered, but he discovered that there were lasting consequences to his earlier actions. "We only wanted what was best for you," Anne added, trying to ease the tension. "What was best for us, or what was most convenient for you?" Martha asked directly. "Because when we discovered something extraordinary, you showed no interest. When we proved our capability, you showed no pride. You only changed your minds when it became publicly embarrassing to maintain your previous position." The direct confrontation with the children's motivations was uncomfortable but necessary. Arthur and Martha had learned to value relationships based on genuine respect, not convenience or appearances. Charles and Anne left the visit even more uncomfortable than when they had arrived. They had discovered that they couldn't simply resume their family relationship as if nothing had happened. "They can come back when they're ready to treat us as people who deserve respect," Arthur said to Martha after the children left. "Until then, we have a chosen family that genuinely values us." The chosen family that had formed around the underground construction project was truly more supportive and respectful than the traditional family relationships that had deteriorated. Lucy, who had become an integral participant in the project, started bringing her own children to help on the weekends. The children were fascinated by the story of Eleanor and Joseph and loved helping with the restoration of the structure. "Grandpa Arthur, do you think I'll make an important discovery like you did one day?" asked Petey, an 8-year-old grandson who had fallen in love with the story. "I'm sure you will, my boy," Arthur replied, hugging his grandson. "But remember, the most important discoveries aren't the ones you find in the ground. They're the ones you find about yourself and about the people you love." The children's participation in the project created a rich intergenerational dynamic that benefited everyone. The grandchildren learned about history, manual work, and family values, while Arthur and Martha rediscovered the joy of teaching and guiding the younger ones. "It's interesting how this project connected 3 generations of our family," Martha observed, watching Lucy working alongside Arthur while the children organized historical photographs. "Eleanor and Joseph, us, and now our grandchildren, all united by a story of love and perseverance." The intergenerational continuity gave an even deeper meaning to the project. It wasn't just about preserving the past, but about creating connections that would extend into the future. The project also attracted the attention of other elderly people in the region who had felt marginalized and undervalued by their own families. They came seeking inspiration and found a supportive community. "You've shown us that we don't have to accept being treated as useless," said Mrs. Carman, a 75-year-old neighbor who had started participating in the community center activities. "We can demand respect and create our own spaces of value." The impact of the project on the local elderly community was profound and transformative. Arthur and Martha had inadvertently created an empowerment movement for senior citizens who felt undervalued and ignored. "We never imagined our discovery could inspire so many people," Arthur said during a weekly meeting of the group that had formed around the project. The community center set up in the restored underground structure became a regular meeting point for educational, social, and mutual support activities. It was exactly what Arthur and Martha had dreamed of when they began the excavation. "The most beautiful thing about all of this," Martha reflected, "is that Eleanor and Joseph finally got what they dreamed of. They wanted a place where they could be happy and accepted. Now, 70 years later, this place exists and is helping dozens of people find happiness and acceptance." The realization of Eleanor and Joseph's historical dream through the contemporary project created a sense of cosmic purpose that transcended individual circumstances. It was as if history had come full circle in a way no one could have planned. The project's success also drew attention from other rural municipalities interested in replicating the initiative. Arthur and Martha began receiving invitations to speak about community historical preservation and senior empowerment. "You've become a regional example," Mr. Lawrence said proudly. They showed that senior citizens can lead important changes in their communities. The transformation of Arthur and Martha from seemingly obsolete elderly people to recognized community leaders was an extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple excavation in the backyard. "You know what we really discovered when we dug that earth?" Arthur asked Martha during a moment of reflection. "What?" "We discovered that we never lost our ability to dream, to fight, to build something meaningful. We just needed an opportunity to prove it to ourselves and to the world." The most important discovery had really been about their own capabilities and worth as people. The underground construction was the catalyst, but the true discovery was the renewal of their self-esteem and purpose in life. Months after the start of the excavation, Arthur and Martha were in a completely different position. They were respected in the community. They had a significant project they were leading, a chosen family that supported them, and a rich personal history they had discovered and preserved. "Do you think our other children will ever understand what they lost?" Martha asked. "Maybe yes, maybe no," Arthur replied philosophically. but we know what we gained, and that's what really matters. The wisdom acquired through experience had taught Arthur and Martha to focus on what they could control and value, rather than worrying about people who had chosen not to appreciate them. The underground construction project continued to grow and evolve, always with Arthur and Martha at the center, as respected leaders and visionaries. They had proven that age did not determine ability, that personal history had value, and that it was never too late to start a new chapter in life. When we started digging that earth, we thought we were trying to prove something to our children, Martha said in a moment of introspection. But actually we were discovering something about ourselves that had been forgotten, not lost. The journey of self-discovery had been just as valuable as the historical discovery. Arthur and Martha had rediscovered their own strength, creativity, and worth as unique people with so much still to contribute to the world. The legacy they were building through the project would be lasting. Future generations of their family and community would have not only the preserved history of Eleanor and Joseph, but also the inspiring example of Arthur and Martha, who refused to accept marginalization and fought for dignity and purpose in their later years. "Our story is still being written," Arthur said, looking at the thriving community center they had created, "and it seems the best chapters are still to come." The optimistic outlook on the future contrasted dramatically with the despair they had felt when their children first announced the plans for forced institutionalization. They had turned a crisis into an opportunity, an apparent end into a new beginning. The project had become a living testament that elderly people have valuable stories to tell, important abilities to contribute, and legitimate dreams to fulfill. Arthur and Martha had proven that the later years could be a time of discovery, growth, and fulfillment, not just of decline and dependency. "You know what I'm most proud of in all of this," Martha said on a quiet afternoon, watching the activities at the community center. "What?" "It's that we managed to create something that will continue to exist after we're gone. Eleanor and Joseph couldn't fully realize their dreams, but through us, their dreams came true in an even more beautiful way than they had imagined. The continuity across generations gave the project a transcendent meaning. It was more than historical preservation or personal empowerment. It was about the human capacity to turn love and persistence into lasting legacies that benefit entire communities. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this thrilling journey of Arthur and Martha? Do you believe they made the right decisions in resisting family pressures? Share your opinion in the comments with sincere words. We really want to know what you think about this story of overcoming and discovery. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.